Hello everyone, we are back with another perfectly unscientific gaming review, and this time we're looking at the Fleet Hernandez Intel Science Vessel. This is the latest Zen Store offering of Intel Science ships that came out. There's also the standard 25th century variant, the Somerville Intel Science Vessel. It's a standard science ship with 3 engineering consoles, 5 science consoles, and 3 tactical consoles. It also features a Commander Science Intel seat, a Lieutenant Commander Engineering seat, a Lieutenant Commander Tactical seat, a Lieutenant Universal Intel seat, and an Ensign Science seat. So that's the stats of the ship. And, being an Intel Science vessel, it also includes a cloaking device, which is a standard for most Federation Intel Science vessels. But the most interesting part of this ship is its trait, Spore-Infused Anomalies. And with this trait, whenever you activate a Science or Intel Bridge Officer ability, all foes within 5 kilometers of your anomalies will take electrical damage and get their power drained slightly. Anomalies include Gravity Well, Titan's Rift, Subspace Vortex, Chronometric Inversion Field, and Timeline Collapse. It also activates off of the aftershocks of Gravity Well and Titan's Rift. So with that being the trait, and you see it's slotted here in the build, which we'll get to in just a moment, let's also have a look at its console, which is the Mycelial Spore Burst. It gives a slight boost to aux power, a slight boost to scientific readiness, but at its core, it acts more like eject warp plasma variant that does electrical damage based on mycelial energy. You'll see it used in the run later. And looking at this console now after working it into the build, it's probably not something I'd slot on most ships. So looking at our stats here, we are running a fairly standard setup. We got 22% resting crit rate. There's our tactical stats, our science stats with 267 control and 375 exotic particle generator, and then the engineering stats. We're running for our bridge officer abilities, override subsystem safeties 1 to boost our power and activate spore-infused anomalies, charged particle burst, which is mainly used to activate our deteriorating secondary deflector, gravity well 3, and subspace vortex 3, and you'll note that this will promote the lion's share of our damage in the parse later on, photonic officer, which using the improved Photonic Officer trait, also buffs our shield and hull healing as well as exotic damage and helps us with our cooldowns. Then we have Structural Analysis, which activates the deteriorating secondary deflector and debuffs the specific target. Tactical Team for clearing pesky boarding parties and other debuffs. Chemosite-laced weaponry 2. Torpedo spread 3. Emergency power to engines 1 for just getting around quicker and resetting the cooldown on evasive maneuvers. Aux to structural integrity field 1, which is our spike heal. And structural integrity collapse 3, which doesn't seem very potent, but you'll see in the parse it actually does do some nice damage on the larger targets of the run. Then finally we just got a hazard emitters 1 just sitting here for a heal over time and debuff clear. So stat-wise, or rather equipment-wise, we're running our particle emission plasma torpedo, which deals plasma damage, but also leaves behind a plasma hazard cloud that deals some pretty nice damage. Gravimetric photon torpedo, which when we fire it has a chance to leave huge gravimetric rifts, which you'll see and do a lot of damage. The Dyson proton weapon is really only here for the 2-piece set effect, which in turn boosts our critical chance and damage that photon projectiles do. Boost critical chance by 3%. Running a colony deflector with control and a bit of EPG, but also the call crit modifier, which boosts our critical severity and critical chance based on hull percentage that we have. Our deteriorating secondary deflector, once again, that leans into EPG and control. This is activated whenever we use structural analysis or our charged particle burst. Then we're running the 2-piece temporal set for our impulse engines and shields, and the reason for that is because if we look at this here, The 2-piece set, otherwise known as Predictive Decay Algorithms, gives a 25% all damage boost for damage over time and hazard effects, which of course is our Gravity Well and Subspace Vortex and Plasma Clouds, because those are damage over time. Our Warp Core, this is something you could probably sub out if you wanted to tinker around with maybe a different shield, put the Temporal Warp Core in here, but the reason I got this one is this is mainly just a legacy item for me. When we activate this battery, it gives us a 50% Bridge Officer ability recharge time cooldown for 30 seconds. Then on the back, we're running the 3-piece chronometric calculation set, or 4-piece set, forgive me for that, with the chronometric Polaron Beam Array, the Omni, and the Krenim Chronoton Torpedo. And the 4th piece, of course, is the chronometric capacitor down here. And this gives us this nice click ability that boosts our exotic damage and energy damage when clicked. In engineering consoles, we're running the Bioneural Infusion circuits for critical severity, Delphic Tear for boosting exotic damage and critical severity, and on its own does some nice damage. The Constriction Anchor boosts exotic damage, that's its pure focus here. Then our Science console slots are fairly self-explanatory, boosting EPG and control. Then we got a Tachyokinetic Converter, which boosts control, but also gives us critical chance and critical severity. Then we got the Temporal Distanglement Suite from the Butterfly mission, I believe it is. I might be wrong on that, which gives us critical chance and critical severity based on auxiliary power. The Chronometric Capacitor, as I mentioned, completes the 4-piece chronometric calculation set, as well as boosting EPG. Our Timeline Stabilizer, which helps us reduce the cooldowns of any Bridge Officer powers that are lingering, and Captain abilities as well, which is important at some points in the run. Then finally, Mycelial Spore Burst. Alright, so let's have a look at our skill tree. It's a standard TAC ultimate skill tree, not much to write home about with this, but main focus, of course, is the 3 ticks in Exotic Particle Generator. Then for specializations, we're running Temporal and Strategist, and the reason for this, the 2 main reasons for this, is we get the boost from EPG and a boost to some of our hazard over time effects, and also a nice little insurance policy for keeping us alive with continuity. And the main reason, of course, for Strategist is diversionary tactics, amongst many of the other things that it provides, such as boosting damage and critical chance and critical severity, since we're not threatening. Alright, so let's have a look at the traits. First up is Anchored, so whenever we're standing still, we get bonus all damage. Unconventional Systems, when we run our control Bridge Officer abilities, in this case on this build Gravity Well, we reduce the cooldown of our universal consoles, in this case to Mycelial Spore Burst and Delphic Tear. We might consider swapping this one out to something else, since we only have 1 control Bridge Officer abilities, but that's a thought for a different day. Conservation of Energy is a base Science Captain trait that whenever we get hit by energy damage, we have a chance to get a 10% bonus damage on all exotic powers, stacks up to 3 times. That's why I like running Science, or rather Science exotic builds on a Science Captain. Menacing, when threatening stance is offline, it increases the threat reduction by an additional 50%. Context is for Kings. If we're not getting hit, this turns out to be a all damage buff, but if we are getting hit, it is an all damage resistance buff, so this is just a very nice trait to have. Particle Manipulator, the very important part of any Science exotic build, gives our exotic abilities 50% crit chance, and as we stand right now, 37.5 critical hit severity. Pseudo-Submission, whenever we use a hull heal, we placeate all foes within 10 kilometers. This goes once again to our survival aspect that we talked about before when it comes down to our duty officers, which we'll see in just a moment. Self-modulating fire on outgoing critical hits. Energy weapons and torpedoes gain 50% shield penetration. And Fleet Coordinator, 2% bonus all damage for each team member that we have. Starship trait-wise, we're running Improved Photonic Officer from the Tholian Iktomi for its, of course, 10-second increase to Photonic Officer, but also that 25% bonus exotic damage. Honor Dead, focusing on survival, which you can get very cheap on the exchange. Improved Gravity Well from the Science Andorian. That means we can always have our Gravity Well up. Ceaseless Momentum. I think this comes from one of the lockbox ship packs. I'm not entirely sure which one. I don't remember, but it's available on the exchange. Whenever we fire torpedo damage, we get kinetic bonus damage. It stacks up to 5 times. And with this will also boost our Gravity Well and Subspace Vortex damage since they deal kinetic damage. And then finally, Mycelial Spore Burst, which we went over earlier in the video, which comes from the ship. We have Advanced Targeting Systems Type 2 from the Dyson Rep for critical severity, Chronocapacitor Array, Particle Generator Amplifier for bonus exotic damage, Precision for critical hit, and Nukara Ox Power Offense. Then down here in Active Reputation, Tier 5 Temporal, Tier 5 Iconian, Tier 5 Undine, and Tier 5 Romulan, because you'll note in the run that we do what I call my Science Alpha, which includes our Scattering Field, Romulan Tier 5 Cloak, and Chronometric Energy Converter for just a huge spike damage near the end of the run. Now, moving on into our duty officers here, same as last time on the build, we got energy weapons officers for whenever we fire our energy weapons. We're going to be getting a stacking critical severity buff. The con officer to recharge evasive maneuvers whenever we activate emergency power to engines. Now, this one's different than previous builds you would have seen here. This gives us a chance to get aftershock gravity wells, which we want for our infused spore anomalies trait. Research lab scientist chance to play safe when using charged particle burst, and a Xindi biochemist for having a chance to reduce threat after activating exotic damage abilities, because exotic damage builds do take a lot of threat. So with that being said, let's have a look at the run and then the parse. Okay, so that was the run, and here you can see it's 154k DPS run. We had some pretty nice gravimetric rifts for 20k. Deteriorating secondary deflector did 18k. Gravity well 17k. Particle emission plasma cloud 16.3. Subspace vortex 12.4. Pets 9.7. Which, when we drilled down into that, that was a mix of our Geneva class, anti-time entanglement, singularity, and mycelial spores. You're getting the idea of why we're not going to be running that console in the future. Then Spore-Infused Anomalies on its own did 7.9k. Spore-Infused Anomalies with Gravity Well 3 did another 2.8. Spore-Infused Anomalies with our Subspace Vortex did another 2. And then you can see right there with a little bit from this Aftershock Gravity Well, we're well over 10k for just the Spore-Infused Anomalies trade. So that's why we're running that trade and why I'm very pleased with how it turned out. And then it just goes down from there. Entropic Rider, here's our Delphic Tear, Structural Integrity Collapse for 3k. And then it pretty much just trickles down after that. And you can see this is the standard makeup of an exotic damage build. All right, so that was the Fleet Hernandez Intel Science Vessel. It's probably not a ship I'll continue to fly because there's many other interesting things with temporal suites, but I'm going to keep having a look at the trait Spore-Infused Anomalies. So hopefully this video was at all useful to you. If you have any ideas about where to go in the future for different science builds we should have a look at, definitely post that in the comments. And if this was at all useful to you, give it a like and subscribe. So we'll see you next time.